Enos will return next Wednesday evening at 8 o'clock, 7 Central and Mountain Time on most of these stations.
Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners. Coming to Kickstarter from the mind of Franco, the man behind Teen Titans Go to the Library, Faye and the Moon, and All Yeah Comics, comes the new LXT, the adversarial fighting card game, live now on Kickstarter. LXT, Lux vs. Tenebris. Imagine a loved one has been spirited away to a land of terror and torture. Would you be willing to go after them and fight through a horde of acolytes of the Dark One just to get them back? Developed as a role-playing card game that can be played multiple ways. The cards will have full-color illustrations on the front and chock full of stamps and moves on the back. You can also get the LXT Who's Who book with origin stories and information about all the characters. Still want more? Also available is the LXT Dark Atlas book, filled with prose stories about all the baddies and illustrations from a wide selection of comic artists. There are plenty of add-ons you can purchase separately, like comic books, stickers, original art from the game, and more. It's going to be a howling good time. LXT, live, now on Kickstarter. Welcome back, everybody. Time again for Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. I'm John Suntress. I'm happy to welcome David Pepose back to Word Balloon for a brand new conversation. Good to see you, David.
Great to be here, John. Thank you so much for having me back. Excited to catch up with you.
My pleasure, man. Well, you're doing some really interesting stuff. We've got a new series from you from Dynamite coming up very soon. Yeah. But before we get to that, last month you wrapped up your run on, or at least for now, perhaps, the new Punisher.
That's right. We wrapped up the introduction miniseries to Joe Garrison, the Marvel Universe's brand new Punisher. And I couldn't be happier with how that book was received. I attribute so much of that to artist Dave Wachter, who just is an amazingly talented artist. If you haven't pre-ordered his book, Uncanny Valley, over at Boom Studios, final order cutoff is this Monday, so be sure to call your comic shop. It was such a wonderful opportunity to be able to kind of add a brick to the House of Ideas, and being able to tell Joe's story as Marvel's newest Punisher. It was a really fun. It was a fun opportunity, and I've already heard some rumblings of where Joe might appear next. Some very exciting stuff, and I'm very excited with the way that the people received that book. It really it speaks volumes to the amazing fandom and readership that we have, and for people to give Joe a chance and to really get engaged and excited by his adventures. I'm glad that they were having just as much fun as we were.
It's interesting because I do think you give Joe obviously initially the same motivation as Frank. His family's wiped out, and it's how he responds. And there's I don't know if we want to because it's only been a couple weeks since the last issue. People might be trade waiting, but there's a very interesting climax, and it kind of flies in the. I'm not even sure. Listen, I think it's great, David, that you created this new Punisher and new character. Yeah. I'm still wrestling with the need to cancel Frank Castle. It still confuses me, and there is an ending to your story. Yeah. That could easily have been a Frank Castle ending, and instead it's a Joe Garrison ending and stuff. Yeah. So, unwrap all of that for me.
Sure. Well, so I can only speak really to my experience with the character. I can't speak to any previous runs, but for me, I think when I approach this character, when you want to come up with a legacy character, you're always trying to take kind of an alternate angle. on what makes that a core concept so appealing. So for me, the Punisher, it's about not only is it sort of one man's quest for vengeance, but it's also, you want to add in the gunplay, you want to add in the action, you want to add in the tenacity. But something that my editor Tom Brevoort and I spoke a lot about was that we wanted to make sure we had a character that fit into the Marvel universe. It's something that we could really, you could put Joe in an adventure, say with Spider-Man or Daredevil or any of the other Marvel characters down the line. We also wanted to make sure that we had something that still felt like a Punisher story first and foremost. We weren't so much trying to reinvent the wheel as much as Tom once said. We wanted to make another sturdy wheel, and so a lot of that was boiling things down into something that you could say very quickly. You could say in one sentence. Frank Castle is the Punisher. He has one of those origins, those concepts that you can say very quickly. Former Marine, his family gets killed in a gang shootout, and he becomes a vigilante. For Joe, we tried to frame it as the John Wick of S.H.I.E.L.D. Is framed for his family's murder, and he tries to find his family's killers. The thing that really was, I think, really so fun for me about tackling this new Punisher was that when you meet Frank Castle in Amazing Spider-Man 129, he's already made his decision. It's that, you see he's already had a body count. And that was something that Tom and I talked a lot about was this is an origin story. This is how does somebody decide that they're going to become a Punisher? Because both in the real world and in the Marvel universe, that's a loaded name. That's a name that when I was tasked with taking the book, I knew that the fandom is already very fractured. It's already very, very atomized. The Punisher is a character that no matter who you're on, which side of the political spectrum you're on, a lot of people have very strong opinions of what should or shouldn't be a Punisher story. And so for us, we wanted to kind of bring things back to basics. We wanted to tell a story that was street level, that was action packed, but also followed a character as he slowly made his decision from going from just a personal path of vengeance to how does that war go wide. And that was something we touched upon in the book was, Joe from the beginning is, he's taking his notes as mission reports. He thinks that this is short term. And then by the end, spoilers, when he's fighting Jigsaw, our new sort of villainous take on the high table, if Joe is our John Wick, he realizes this isn't a mission anymore. It's a war. This is something that has gone wide, and that Jigsaw kind of has its claws in a lot of different things. But for me, the way that I always wanted to pitch this Punisher, Frank Castle's had a long, long history, and so a lot of people, their thoughts on him are very calcified, and for me, it was sort of, okay, we have a brand new character. This is a chance to have a brand new impression. And the way that I had pitched the character to Tom was I wanted him to be a Punisher for the little guy. If you have a problem and the law can and won't help you, you call the Punisher to help you settle the score. And so I think having a Punisher who can fight all sorts of villains, both heightened villains in the Marvel universe, but also other types of street level villains, but always kind of keeping in mind the little guy. And I think that's the thing that really sets him apart as a character. And so it's something I'm very excited for readers and other writers to be playing on in future appearances for Joe. But I'm very happy with how that series was received. This was written exactly as I pitched it. I know we've had a few people ask questions about, was this thing going to be a longer run? And this was always going to start with a 4-issue miniseries, similar to books like White Widow or Sentry that just came out recently. It's been a really fun experience, and I'm very excited. I've already heard some really cool rumblings of where Joe is going to show up next. So I would keep your eyes peeled because it sounds pretty cool.
Okay, from the chat, a couple comments from comic critics. Troy Brownfield is very kind and says the major takeaway from David's Punisher is that David kicked huge ass from a thankless position. Sure, man, always yet creating a new version of something. Absolutely, there's going to be detractors.
It's one of those things that's just that if you're going to play the sport, you better be ready to take a few hits. And so it's one of those things. There, of course, we're very passionate Punisher fans out there who, of course, would have some trepidation about a brand new character. And for me, I always saw it as, the Punisher's been a legacy for many, many years. You look at Jake Gallows, the Punisher of 2099, who I was lucky enough to write in Savage Avengers. You look at Rachel Cole Alvis, who's another amazing character who almost showed up twice in Savage Avengers. We've got Lynn Michaels. You've got Outlaw. There's many, 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 many other characters that have worn the Punisher skull. And so for us, it's just about additive. It's what can we add to the Punisher as a concept? What can we add to the greater Marvel tapestry? So it's one of those things that I'm super thrilled with the book. And it's one of those things I've been really fortunate to see how many fans have given our book a shot and said some really positive stuff about us. So I'm perfectly, I don't consider anything to be thankless. I feel very fortunate to be in this position and to be able to tell these kinds of stories and to work with the amazing talents of artists like Dave Wachter and Dan Brown and my editor Tom Brevoort, who's a guy who I really look up to. I respect the hell out of him, and it's been a real treat to be able to work with a team of that kind of caliber.
Yeah, again, a lot of my favorite people mentioned in that group, including David and Tom. Certainly, I don't know Dan as well, but there you go. John Del Aros, another comic critic, says good evening, and you've kind of already answered this, but I'll still ask the question: was it tough with fans feeling slighted with how Frank Castle was treated prior to your run to get people on board? Although he thought you did a great job with the new character.
Sure. It's one of those things. It's an occupational hazard, especially in the year 2024 on social media. People are going to have lots of opinions. And the thing that for me that I constantly try to remind myself is ultimately at the end of the day, the thing that I owe my readers is a point of view and really to kind of commit to that. And so for me, it's one of those things. Yeah, there were people who had concerns about our new Punisher book, and there were people who may have said some unkind things. But the thing is there are plenty of people who just didn't read the book and sort of kind of knee-jerk reactions. And at the end of the day, I can't really let those things impact me too much because at the end of the day, I'm writing books for people who are reading them. And I will say we've had so many people read the books and enjoy it. I'm sure there are people who did read the book and it wasn't for them, and that's the ball game. It's statistics. So I try not to let it bother me too much. But I try to take the good with the bad, and and I think just on average, I think the good really does outweigh the bad.
I want to show because it's at the end of issue 4, this great David Wachter character piece that designed the new look for Joe's Punisher uniform and everything, and we also discuss it how the skull design has changed obviously, and it's slightly it's like it almost his and you'll describe it better than me, but his tech is almost involved with his suit, giving it the skull look rather than just the skull emblem that Frank wore.
Yes, it was one of those things that was a needle we really wanted to thread in the right way, because like I said, the Punisher as a character, it's very polarizing. Wherever you are on the political spectrum, a lot of people have very strong opinions of what the Punisher should or shouldn't do, and they can often be contradictory. So for me, something that Tom and I discussed a lot is, both in the real world but also in the Marvel universe, calling yourself the Punisher is a choice. And that was really, I think, the overarching theme of this miniseries was how do you go to make that choice of calling yourself the Punisher? And so I particularly thought we needed some sort of logo to separate this guy, to make him stand out, and so that was the challenge that Dave Wachter tackled in such a nice way. He really kind of elegantly put together this inverted skull, showing that this isn't Frank. This is a very different take on a Punisher character. But you see in the very first issue, people see that ballistic chest plate. They see his weapons belt, and the media runs with it. They say, "Oh, I think there's a skull in his chest," and so people are calling him the Punisher through the whole series. And kind of like again to go back to John Wick, that first movie, everyone keeps asking him if he's back. And then by the end of it, he goes, everyone's been asking if I'm back, and I'm starting to think I am. And that was something that we tried to channel a little bit, and a little bit of the Batman Beyond moment as well, where somebody says, I would have expected more from somebody pretending to be the Punisher. And at that point, he finally has committed to this. He knows that this is a bigger mission, and he accepts, like, I am the Punisher. And so, yeah, it was such a fun experience. And honestly, getting to work with somebody like Dave, he really is an artist's artist. I love working with him. I would work with him again in a heartbeat on literally any project. But I think he did such a great job with the fight choreography, which is something that I tried to channel from Rick Remender's run on Punisher, which I think is one of my favorite takes on the character.
Very good run. Absolutely.
I'm pretty thrilled with how that design came together, and the artwork just, I think it might be the best looking book I've done at Marvel to date. It's a high bar, but Dave and Dan just knocked it out month after month. I couldn't be prouder of them.
That's excellent, man. Pumpkin Time. Good name, Pumpkin Time.
Pumpkin Time.
Joe felt so new, and the ideas that came out of it, a Renegade X Shield op, has me excited. Joe doesn't feel like Frank or Jake, but holds his own as his own.
Pumpkin Time. That is so kind of you to say. I really appreciate that. That was something I really tried to focus on, because this wasn't my first time writing a Punisher. I for those who aren't familiar with my work, I wrote Jake Gallows in the pages of Punisher 2090, or in the pages of Savage Avengers, I should say. And that's what got me this job on Punisher. So it's one of those things that, like, I kind of viewed it as, like, Frank is, like, he's the wrecking ball. He's the guy who he's a force of nature. And Joe is kind of like, he's ice. He is like the surgical sniper, kind of darting in and out. It's very much about the choreography of it all, not just the hardware, although we were giving Joe some interesting and unique shield tech. And I think it was one of those things that it was a fun way to kind of carve out something for a new Punisher that felt very firmly in the Marvel universe, because I do think that that's a challenge that a lot of writers have had writing Frank in the past, is that you look at something like Garth Ennis's run on Punisher, which is just unimpeachably great. That it was one of those, it's a character that there was before Garth and then there was after. And a lot of people since that Garth Ennis run, that's what they want. And that's great for individual stories just featuring the Punisher. But if you want to put him in the Marvel universe, if you want to put him teaming up with Spider-Man or Daredevil or something like that, it does become a little bit of a tonal clash. It's hard for, if you throw a quadruple amputee into a fire pit to then, like, team up with Spider-Man in the next issue and Spider-Man not throw you under the jail. And so that was something that we talked a lot about. It was like, how do we place Joe squarely in the Marvel universe? And that's why we pit him against people like Mr. Hyde or Bushwhacker in the Night Shift, which I'm so glad I was able to tackle a team called the Night Shift. That's one of those sort of hidden gems that I've always wanted to unearth. Fearmaster from Dan Chichester, his run on Daredevil, she was only in 2 issues, but those 2 issues really meant a lot to me as a kid. And then obviously our new Jigsaw. So it was a fun little mini series. Being able to kind of tell that kind of story and really hyper focus it to just cover those 4 issues. It was a real challenge, but I'm really happy with how it came together.
No, I think you did a great job, man. John appreciates the analysis, and very cool. And then Warren says, I believe he had the pleasure of meeting you at an issue 1 signing at Golden Apple Comics. Warren, if you don't know, and if he didn't introduce himself fully, a fantastic Hollywood storyboard artist. And he's buddies with Gabe Hardman and Trevor Goring, a couple other.
That's so cool. Well, Warren, thank you so much for stopping by. I got to schedule another signing with the Golden Apple soon, because Ryan and them are wonderful people. But yeah, if you're in the area, you should stop by at WonderCon in a couple of weeks. I'll be signing there, so would love to catch up.
There you go. Excellent, man. No, and again, I think your run deserves a victory lap, and that's why I'm glad to bring it up. And congrats. And Yeah, I mean, if the opportunity came, would you want to get back? And are there more stories you'd like to tell with Joe?
Absolutely. There are all sorts of villains that I would love to write for Joe. And yeah, there were definitely some things that we discussed for potential storylines down the road. It's one of those things that with the we've changed editors since that original miniseries because my wonderful editor Tom Brevoort has taken over the X-Men line, which they just announced all those books today. They sound fantastic. So there's a little bit of elements of sort of getting ducks in a row for the Punisher's future. But yeah, I'm certainly down to do more. But also, I'm really happy with that 4-issue mini. And I think the thing for having a character survive a new legacy character, and I look at people like Robbie Reyes as an example for that. The best way to have longevity for a legacy character is to have a lot of people writing. So I've already heard tell of behind the scenes of where Joe might be showing up next, and I hope it's the first of many because yeah, he's a fun character, and I think we're just getting started with him.
Very cool. Brad mentions, of course, Mike Barron's great run with Will Spataccio. Sure. Absolutely. Hey, man. Also, Stephen Grant, Circle of Blood. Good Lord, I was a kid when that, or actually, I guess I'm thinking now. Well, I guess I was college age, so I wasn't that young. But that was like the hot book of a moment. Mike Zeck and John Beatty, drew and inked it, and it was such a hot book. It was the first instance in the mid '80s that I remember where the day that it debuted, it already had sold out.
Yeah,
and if you didn't have it on your pull list, you weren't going to get it. And it was just like, Jesus, what the hell, man?
I think it speaks to the iconic power of a character like the Punisher, where it's street level, but I think it also taps into there's a lot of revenge media out there. I feel like you look at Chad Stahelski or David Leitch, they sort of built a cottage industry on movies like that. And yeah, I think for me, the goal of tackling a character like the Punisher, like I said, it's very easy for things to get very polarized. And I can totally understand where there are certain books where, I can see people sort of punching and counter punching based on their point of view, and it totally makes sense. But there was a lot of punching and counter punching already for something like Punisher, and so for us, it was sort of how do we kind of like bring down the temperature of the room a little bit, and just and kind of bring the character back to basics and write a story that feels different, but still like if you hand it to somebody, they're going to know, oh, that's a Punisher story. And so
Sure.
It was a tightrope, but I feel like we certainly thought about it long and hard. And so I feel very good about what we came up with that.
Pumpkin Time wanted to know regarding the 2099 universe. Have you ever read Peter David's return to Spider-Man 2099? He knows you're a huge fan of that era of Marvel.
I just read his Symbiotic Spider-Man 2099 that just came out this week. If you're a fan of Jake Gallows, you may want to look away. No, Peter is such an amazing writer. And I wish only the best for him. I know he's been going through it with his medical stuff. The guy he's a legend. He's written many of my favorite runs on comics. His run on X Factor with Madrox Investigations was hugely influential in the way that I approach my writing. So but his 2099 stuff's amazing. I revisited it when I was writing Savage Avengers and reading his revival of Spider-Man 2099 with Miguel's more gray and red suit. It's all great, and the guy is a modern master, and I wish nothing but the best for him.
I'm with you, man. Beyond his great Marvel stuff like that, and the Hulk, and all the great Marvel stuff he's written, one of my favorite Spider-Man novelists. I mean, he's not only creating his own captain and crew in, I want to say they were the New Frontier books. Mackenzie Calhoun was his captain, and but also, God, anytime he's a great writer of adapted material.
Yeah,
like not novelization. I mean, I'm sure he's done his share of novelizations, but he is with those guys like Max Collins and others that will take a licensed property and give you a story that feels like it would if you were watching the film or the television show or whatever. He just has that ability to really get to the DNA of characters and
Yeah.
do them well. Now, Bob Greenberg and I asked Bob how Peter is doing because he's part of that Crazy Eights writers group.
Yeah.
And he kind of said that. He goes, yeah, he's still recovering, but he's doing good, which is great.
Good. That's it's great to hear. I mean, somebody like Peter David, I feel like he's forgotten more than I'll ever know, and I think that speaks to having somebody who has that kind of longevity and has that kind of tenure, and that's something that's very rare in this business. But it's something that I've always aspired to be. I mean, I've said it in so many interviews that I want to be a 30-year man in this business, and that's what sort of gets me out of bed and has me kind of leading with my biggest swing possible on every possible project.
For the audio audience, I just want to acknowledge that, yeah, John brings up, I'm right, it is Star Trek New Frontier. But yeah, his IDW series that he did with J.K. Woodward, Fallen Angel, is outstanding. It's really, really great. Of course, his Supergirl run at DC. Yes, we could go on and would if we had more time to talk about the greatness of Peter David. But I do want to get back to David's stuff. This David Pepose. And I'm excited, man. You got a cool new take on a goddamn one of my favorite characters. I mean, as a little kid, Saturday mornings I was watching Space Ghost.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad you're a fan. Space Ghost is such a treat to be able to write this series. For those who haven't heard, I'm writing the new Space Ghost series over at Dynamite Entertainment. First issue comes out May 1st, the Wednesday before Free Comic Book Day. You can pre-order it at your local comic shop now. And yeah, I'm having a blast writing this book. I don't think I've had this much fun writing a comic since Savage Avengers. And if you like what I did on Savage Avengers, particularly the found family elements of it, you're going to really enjoy this take on Space Ghost. For those who aren't familiar with the character, and I know you know him, John, but for those who aren't familiar with him, the way that I always like to describe Space Ghost is he's got a little bit of Batman's DNA and a little bit of Superman's DNA, and then you kind of put it in a Flash Gordon kind of sci-fi universe. And so my introduction to Space Ghost, I grew up in the 90s, was Space Ghost Coast to Coast, which is obviously a very ironic, irreverent take on Space Ghost. It is almost not quite divorced from it entirely. They still have the characters and they still have the names, but the tone couldn't be any more different than the original 60s cartoon, which, that was created and designed by the legendary Alex Toth. You can see it in every design. You can see it in every character concept. That cartoon came out the same year as Adam West's Batman, and you can see a lot of shared DNA, and you can see a lot of shared tone with that. Space Ghost, he stops pirates and criminals and hijackers across the galaxy, thanks to the power of his Invisobelt, which turns him invisible, hence the ghost part of his name. He's also got his power bands, one of which it controls fire and ice and laser beams, and then the other one controlling force fields. And so you have that kind of cool collection of powers, plus his team of sidekicks. Space Ghost has Jan and Jace. They're a pair of twins who are his sort of his Robin and his Batgirl, along with their pet monkey Blip. And so when I was revisiting this series for Dynamite, I thought I rewatched all the old episodes, and I was blown away by how many just amazing concepts that Toth and company would just kind of throw out there. But they're only 5 or 6 minutes long. There's no continuity. There's no backstory. Space Ghost shows up fully formed and is fighting a lava monster. And Jan and Jace are already there. And back in 1966, nobody really asked any of those questions. That was the par for the course. That was the trope.
Absolutely.
In the year 2024, though, I think people would be like, why does this grown man have 2 teenagers and a monkey? And that's honestly kind of the through line that we're taking with this series.
Interesting how the group gets together. That's great.
Yeah, I mean, some of the big influences for this run on Space Ghost is Batman the Animated Series and Batman the Long Halloween. So we're kind of tonally in between those two things.
Wow.
Where we're going to pit Space Ghost through just a gauntlet of his most iconic villains. You're going to see Zorak and Brack and Metalis and Moltar and Creature King and Widow and the Council of Doom. You will see them all in this run, but it's also, I think, the emotional through line of all of this, which is you'll see in our first issue, how does Space Ghost wind up in Jan and Jace's orbit? And How do they go from being these orphaned rescues to becoming sidekicks in their own right, to becoming trusted partners, to becoming sort of this surrogate found family, and eventually becoming Space Ghost's reason to live? And so I think a series that is really near and dear to me has been Devin Grayson's Batman Gotham Knights. It just, I was just the right age when it came out. It's a huge influence on my work. I'd say it's the Rosetta Stone for just about everything I've ever been. I've been lucky enough to tell Devin what a huge influence she is on me.
Great.
But that series, for those who don't remember it, if you haven't picked up, there's, I think, 1 or 2 trade paperbacks on Amazon for it. Get them. They're gold. But that series was all about Batman and his relationship with his various members of his family. It's him and Dick Grayson, him and Babs Gordon, him and Superman, him and Aquaman, and him and Huntress.
Yes.
They got a lot of beat out of that one. And so for me, I was like, being able to tell this story and on an issue-to-issue basis, watching these dynamics evolve, that really kind of influenced how I'm structuring this series. Like Batman The Long Halloween, you're going to see we're doing a lot of done-in-one stories with this series. So you'll have an issue with Brack, you'll have an issue with Zorak, you'll have an issue with the Widow, and a few other deeper cuts that you're not going to necessarily expect. But by doing that, that means that every month when you pick up an issue of Space Ghost, you are going to get a cool self-contained story that's going to have a beginning, middle, and ending. That's going to have some character stakes in addition to like the high-flying cosmic adventure. And we'll have a handful of 2-parters when Space Ghost is really on his heels and things are really dire and desperate that'll make the cliffhangers really pop. And then, we might be saving, a 3-parter down the line for something really big and ambitious. But done-in-ones are really, I think, that's the way that it feels like the market is trending at this moment. And those are the books that I respond to the most right now. You look at what Ryan North is doing on Fantastic Four. You see what Steve Orlando is doing on Scarlet Witch. You see what Jed McKay is doing on Moon Knight. Lots of self-contained stories.
Yep.
And I think there's something psychological about it as a reader, where you get to watch these heroes kind of rack up adventure after adventure after adventure. And it makes you feel more invested. It makes you feel like, this is a point viewing. Like, I got to know who Space Ghost is going to fight this week or this month. And it's kind of similar to the original cartoon in that way. So, I couldn't be more excited about this book. Artist Jonathan Lau is just crushing it. He really manages to kind of hit the study in contrast that I think this book really is about. He nails the high flying cosmic adventure. We've got a sequence in our second issue that I wrote it, and I was like, this will be like cool, no big deal. And then he drew it, and I was like, I think this might be the most beautiful sequence I've ever had in a book. And just like shows the power and just like and almost majesty of a character like Space Ghost, which is not something that I think I'd ever expect myself to say. But he also then switches gears immediately to these amazing character beats. We see Jan and Jace hanging out on Ghost Planet, and the way that we're kind of tackling those characters, Jonathan understands the assignment. I think to kind of keep going in this on this train of thought. This is a book that really speaks to something that happened to me in my life very personally, in that my younger siblings are triplets. And so I know what it's like to kind of have 3 little sidekicks running around.
Wow.
But being able to write twins, I know that dynamic very, very well. My younger siblings were each born a minute apart, and that minute defined their hierarchy for they're almost 30 now.
Wow.
The oldest, by 2 minutes, he's the alpha. He is the top dog. Everybody sees him as the oldest. And my baby sister, she's doted on as the baby in the family. And then my middle brother, he's like the most middle child you've ever met. And so that really informed the way that I approached Jan and Jace. For me, Jan is, she's the oldest by a minute. And so, she's the responsible one, and she finds herself in this position that a lot of girls do in families, especially when they're the only girl, which is she's the one who has to think these things through when Jace won't do it, or even when Space Ghost won't do it. but that also means she's feisty. She's tough. She's the one who will call Space Ghost out on his crap to his face. And we have a sequence in one of our early issues where she tells Space Ghost off, and he flies off to go deal with something else because he's like, I'd much rather deal with this thing than face the wrath of a 14-year-old girl. And I think that's something that a lot of single dads can probably relate to. She's kind of she feels like she's got to be the responsible one. Jan and Jace have a degree of tragedy in their backstory that you'll see in issue 1. And so she feels like she's got to be the responsible one to kind of keep everybody together. Whereas Jace is sort of the id to her super ego. He's the one, I don't know if we're ever going to get to it in the text, but the way that I've approached the character is I think he's probably dyslexic. He probably was not great in a school environment, but he's a natural with anything that involves his hands and his mind, a born mechanic and natural pilot. And he's the one who he'll often leap before he looks, but he's also the one who he's got a sense of humor about everything. He's the one who's constantly cracking jokes. He's trying to keep spirits high. Space Ghost Space Ghost comes from his own tragedy, and Jan is kind of struggling with their own tragedy. And that's how Jace thinks that I can keep morale up if I keep laughing, if I keep making jokes. And so kind of having them play off of each other and then how they affect Space Ghost. You'll see kind of early on in our run that Space Ghost also has tragedy that has defined him, that has sort of spurred him on to this quest to bring justice to the galaxy. And, you put him in a room with a pirate and he knows exactly what to do. But as a human being, he's kind of like a B- at this point. He's been kind of isolated on Ghost Planet. He hasn't really had a whole lot of room for any of that socialization. He's just been him by himself on this planet, just leaving to fight bad guys and coming back. It's not exactly a place for kids. And so how does that kind of that friction in between these characters inform them? And so we've got some really fun beats in there. What happens when Jan and Jace explore Ghost Planet for the first time?
I was going to ask, because, Ghost Planet is really just, again, as you describe these 6 and 7 minute cartoons, it's just there. And it's I know there's a story of what is it? Why is it Ghost Planet? Whatever. Yeah. Is he still Tad Ghostly? Is that still his civilian identity?
It's one of those things. I have an idea for Tad Ghostal. I don't know if I can fit it, but the way that I have envisioned it, and we'll see if I kind of am able to fit it in. So I'll say the spoiler just in case I do manage to get in. Is I see Tad Ghostal as his Matches Malone identity.
Hilarious! That's great, man. No,
that would be kind of fun if I'm able to fit it in. That would be sort of if he needs to infiltrate the underworld. That's his name is Tad Ghostal. It does speak a bit to there's been a lot of, for a show that didn't have any continuity. Some of I think a lot of previous comics attempts have comics runs, I should say, have attempted to kind of build their own continuity. You see what Joe Kelly and Ariel Olivetti did in their 2005 miniseries at DC, which was one of my first introductions to the character as a serious character. Or you see what Jeff Parker did with Doc Shanner over in Future Quest. Space Ghost kind of bookended that series, but he was Captain Kerr in that one, and he was Thaddeus Locke in Joe Kelly's run. For me, it's both an ethical thing and a pragmatic thing that, we're building a brand new continuity. It didn't feel right to me to try to cherry pick from another publisher's continuity, especially since they have 2 different continuities. And also I wasn't really sure kind of what the legal element of all that was. So we are starting fresh. You don't have to read anything to pick up our book. You don't have to watch anything to pick up our book. In the same way that Batman The Long Halloween was kind of you read it and every issue is a cool introduction to here's Joker and here's Poison Ivy and here's Solomon Grundy and here's Catwoman. That's what we're going to do in this series. You don't need to know who Brack is. We'll tell you who Brack is. And same thing with Zorak and all that. We're kind of able to add some interesting new context. A lot of having a comic as our runway means we're able to dig in a lot deeper than those 5-minute episodes ever did.
Sure.
And so we're kind of taking approaches. This is a very niche thing, but Machinima did a really interesting YouTube series with Mortal Kombat that is really like embedded itself in my brain for many years, where there's like, oh, this guy, Jax from that game. We're following him as a police officer, and he's interviewing a Yakuza assassin that turns out to be Scorpion. And so you're able to kind of take those original concepts and you're able to kind of honor that, but also add in like an interesting spin or an interesting wrinkle that allows us to kind of populate these characters in an organic way across the universe. Because ultimately, that's kind of the through line of this book is the galaxy's a big place. And the Galactic Patrol, there's no chance that they're going to be able to stomp out crime as it's happening. They just don't have the manpower. They just don't have the reach. And that's how a guy like Space Ghost, that's when he's very useful. And so we'll see him kind of seeing the various members of the Council of Doom, in their own element. And it makes perfect sense because, yeah, it's not just Gotham. It's not just one city that's kind of a cesspool. It's a whole galaxy, and evil flourishes in the darkness between stars. And where that evil grows, Space Ghost is sure to follow.
Very cool.
Lots of fun stuff.
Yeah, man. No, that sounds great. I'm a sucker for all those Hanna-Barbera adventure cartoons because I was seeing, the second and third runs of them in the very early 70s. And,
Sure.
I don't want you to spoil. And it sounds like that Space Ghost's pantheon of villains is going to be there. But, might there be room for other Hanna-Barbera adventure characters in the run?
So there's no plans at the moment. Never say never. I mean, it's one of those things. Jeff Parker and Doc Shanner did such an amazing job with Future Quest.
One of the best.
Part of me feels like it's settled, but it's also just Space Ghost has so many cool villains that there's already a handful from the 80s that I don't think we're going to get a chance to hit. I mean,
you're right about that. The 80s Saturday morning version of Space Ghost still had really good stories and ideas.
Yeah, I mean, Eclipse Woman and the Antimatter Man. I mean, those are just two off the and the Toy Maker, all fun characters. It's one of those things. Dynamite has given us a really generous runway. I've already pitched and sort of mapped out just over a year's worth of story for this. I don't want to overstay my welcome in a book like this. However, if the demand is there, there's absolutely room to kind of add in other adventures in the middle of what I've already planned.
Okay.
But that's the thing. Space Ghost, it's just Alex Toth throughout fastball after fastball. And all these characters, you're just like, oh, man, like they're all incredible. And so I think that was the biggest challenge was just narrowing down. Obviously, the various members of the Council of Doom, that's very important. But also there were others that I was just like, oh, man, can I fit in, the Gargoloids, for example, or the Saucer Crab, or like King Remora and his space sharks, or Glasstor. I'm a big Glasstor fan. I'm probably the only one. He gets like a little quick cameo somewhere. You see, even in our preview pages, we've got Tanza and Brago and One Eye and Lurker, just as like the initial pirate gang that hits Space Colony Omicron, which is where Jan and Jace live. I mean, we're trying to do this series for if you're a newcomer, you don't have to read anything. You can go in cold and you'll fall in love with these characters in real time. But if you're a fan like you are, John, if you watch the original 60s run, if you watch the 80s revival, you're going to be like, oh, hey, I know that character. And, the ones that we really get in depth with, I'm having a lot of fun. But even the ones that kind of get some quicker cameos, it's nice to be able to be like, that's a king who's a shark. And it's not King Shark. It's literally a different King Shark, stuff like that. It's a fan's dream, and a book like this, it's a real gift. Dynamite oh yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, Dynamite and go on. Who?
Dynamite and Warner Brothers is really they recognize there's no continuity here. There's no backstory.
Sure.
So they've given us a lot of latitude to put this together in a way that feels organic and feels as dynamic and character driven as possible. And I said, oh yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, when you mentioned Warner, I was wondering if there was a rights holder vetting at all of what you wanted to do with the character.
Sure. Yeah, they read over my entire 30-page document that I had my plans, and I wrote them in pretty specific detail. And yeah, they only gave me, I think, like one or two notes. I think I'll it's a minor spoiler. I think the only note that they had was I had asked if we wanted to give Jan and Jace their own superhero names. They're like, yeah, we don't have to do that. And I was like, okay, sounds good. And I think that's the only thing that that's really the only note of any material. I think, what, in issue 1, they said, hey, could we have this guy have like some sort of like space swear? I don't even
Like
remember.
frack. Yeah,
Yeah,
sure. Like
I think it was something exactly that. I was like, holy frack. I think that's the only note I've gotten so far. They've been really amazing licensors to work with. They've really given us a lot of runway and a lot of rope to be able to kind of give Space Ghost as much respect and as much excitement as we can.
Understood. No, and really talking about a lot of the features of him and his background and stuff. There's, as you said, there's a little Batman in there. Good Lord, you see where the Super Friends,
Sure.
where they were inspired by Space Ghost, because Zan and Jaina and Gleek are absolutely Jan, Jason, and Blip.
Yeah.
So
Boy, you're dead on. Yeah, I see, there's a little bit of Batman, there's a little bit of Superman, there's a little bit of Iron Man with the tech, there's even a little bit of Punisher.
And the Phantom, I mean, really, the Ghost Planet and everything could be Skull Island, essentially.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. And it's kind of nice to like have the DNA of these very iconic archetypical figures, and then you kind of filter them through the prism of Alex Toth's design work, which is just so immediately engaging. It comes out to, it's kind of like a very unique gumbo, and it's a real blast to write. And I think it speaks to the way that I like to approach things as a writer. You've seen, and all of my projects are all mashups. It's this meets this. And so, being able to kind of approach these characters like that, you look at somebody like Metalis, for example, where I'm like, okay, he's like Dr. Doom by way of General Zod by way of Bane. And I can see kind of how those pieces all come together to form a character who feels very different than any of them, but somebody who still feels very compelling and engaging and can give Space Ghost a run for his money. I'm a big Metalis fan, and I'm very excited for. I haven't written him yet, but we have some plans for him a little later down the line. That once we get to it, I'm like, oh man, it's some of my favorite choreography that I've outlined to date. It's one of those. I couldn't be more excited about this book. Obviously, as you can see, it's just been it's been a real treat to kind of be able to take the ball and run with it, and having as much rope as Dynamite and Warner Brothers has given us.
That's great, man. No, again, like you said, immediately as a kid, that design, you can't not be excited about his costume and the cowl, his cowl. Gary Owens, the great voiceover guy, the announcer of Laugh-In, if you like, vintage TV, was Space Ghost. And then George, and I forget George's last name, the Coast to Coast Space Ghost. And and as you're looking it up, he used to be on the comic book circuit.
Yeah, George Lowe.
Say it again.
George Lowe,
absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, I know in my early convention days of the early aughts, he was always there and stuff, and very funny. And I love Space Ghost Coast to Coast. Again, it's much like Batman. You can play with him and have a comedy Space Ghost and a very serious Space Ghost. So looking forward to it. Yeah.
Yeah. I like, the thing that for me, it's like many of my books, the contrast is really where it's at, where you're able to have these like dramatic moments, and you're able to have Space Ghost have some pathos, but we're not doing a grim and gritty version of it. This is not the Robert Pattinson, the Batman version of Space Ghost. This is a character that we've got the drama, but then we're able to cut it with it, thanks to Jan and Jace. We're able to add in the moments of humor and the heartfelt moments and the moments of wonder, where they're seeing all this through the eyes of somebody who's brand new and idealistic to all this. And then watching Space Ghost kind of go from being kind of this gruff loner to kind of a begrudging father figure to sort of this surrogate single dad. It's a really kind of it's honestly it's a really beautiful emotional through line. And so I always say, if you're a fan of what I did on Savage Avengers, if you read the first, if you saw the cover, you're like, oh, that's all the gritty characters. And then you get to by issue 4 or 5, you're like, they all have marshmallow hearts. That's kind of, we will be doing that in Space Ghost. We want you to fall in love with these characters. And I think if you haven't fallen in love with them by issue 2, I think your heart is made out of sterner stuff than mine.
David, mentioning Savage Avengers, and I haven't checked in a while, and I really should go back and read a lot of those early issues. The ones where you had Conan in it, are they not on Marvel Unlimited, or are they available?
No,
all right, I figured, and obviously I figured with the rights,
Yes. I believe that was something rights related, because Jerry Duggan's run on Savage Avengers also was not on Unlimited. But yeah, I know it's a bummer, because I think there were a lot of people who waited. They weren't even waiting for the trade. They were waiting for Marvel Unlimited, and unfortunately, it wasn't going to exist there. But you can still order the trade paperbacks. They're all available. Or if you find me at a con, I will gladly sign some copies for you. I've got plenty here.
There you go. That's excellent, man. No, very exciting stuff. Other projects that we're not acknowledging in this conversation? What else is going on, man?
Well, the trade paperback for Moon Knight City of the Dead came out not last week, but the week prior. So you can pick that up if you missed the series. It's got Moon Knight traveling to the City of the Dead to rescue the soul of a young runaway, and it introduces Layla Al Fawley as the all-new Scarlet Scarab from the Disney Plus show. So that was a really fun book with artist Marcelo Ferreira and Sean Damian Hill. And so I had a lot of fun in that book. Moon Knight's one of my favorite Marvel characters. So being able to play in Jed McKay's sandbox, really great guy. And then The Devil That Wears My Face, issue 6 is coming out May 8th. So the week after Space Ghost wraps up. And so you can pre-order that still at your local comic shop. If you're unfamiliar with the book, it's Face Off meets The Exorcist. It's about Father Franco Vieri. He's an 18th century Vatican priest who's grappling with a pretty profound crisis of faith. He's tasked with performing an exorcism on the son of a Spanish nobleman, and unfortunately for him, the ritual backfires. And so Vieri's trapped in this stranger's body while his body's been hijacked by the demon known as Legion, who immediately hightails it to the Vatican to wreak havoc. If you haven't read issue 5, I won't spoil it, but we'll just say Legion has ascended to a much higher place than even he might have expected. And Vieri is prepping for a one big last stand. I'm working with Alex Cormack on the book. He's one of the most talented artists I've ever worked with. I think he's the voice of a generation when it comes to horror comics. I can't wait to work with him on another project. He and I are already talking about our next horror book together. He's just an amazingly talented guy and a sweet guy to boot. So I can't say enough good things about working with Alex, and I really couldn't be prouder of Devil. I think it's one of the best creator-owned books I've ever worked on. And so I'm really excited for people to see how it ends, because we got a twist waiting for you that is going to turn the whole series on its ear. It's something very personal to me, and I can't wait for you to read it.
Well, we discussed Devil with My Face and your Moon Knight miniseries the last time we spoke back in November, everybody. Yeah. So look for, if these concepts are new to you, you might want to go back to that previous conversation where we did talk about it. As promised, David, I figured if I threw up the bat signal that Nick Barucci would answer, and here he is.
Hey!
Jumping in to say hi to us both and say thank you to David for joining us on Space Ghost and killing it.
My pleasure.
There you go.
Seriously, Nick, thank you for having me on this book. Like I said, I haven't had this much fun writing a comic in some time. I'm loving writing Space Ghost. I'm loving writing the issue that I am working on right now that I will hopefully have for you sometime next week. It's just a thrill. Really, thank you guys for thinking of me with this. I think you guys knew before I knew what a fun book this would be for me to work on. And I'm having the time of my career. So thanks for having me on this.
And Nick, I got to again congratulate you for another property that you decide, hey, Dynamite should do a series on that. And just as I've enjoyed the Lone Ranger and the Green Hornet, I'm very happy to hear that Space Ghost is coming. Give us those order numbers, David, the dates to order issue 1.
Yeah, so you can pre-order Space Ghost #1 through final order cutoff is April 8th. That's a Monday, so you got I think 3 weeks from this coming Monday to call your local comic shop and pre-order. We've got some amazing covers. Francisco Mattina has our A cover. I believe Jay Lee is doing our B cover. Bjorn Behrens, I believe, is doing our C cover, and Michael Cho is doing our D cover, our gold key inspired retro covers. And
Great.
Yeah, they're fantastic. And I have it from initial orders are due next week. So yes, so initial orders would be great. So if you called your comic shop like ASAP to pre-order, that would be great, because my puppy's kibble doesn't come cheap. So pre-order. Let the whole world know that you want this book, and tell Dynamite you want this book, because I want to keep writing it. Call your local comic shop, get those covers. We've got foil versions, we've got virgin versions, we've got line art versions, we've got blank covers. We got something for everybody. So call your local comic shop and they will be able to give you the hookup.
That sounds great, man. No, I'm very excited for this series. And and Barucci, I bothered you today on our Facebook direct messages. I want you on the show, man. Come on. And he says a nice comment here. He says, you and Jonathan Lauer magic together. Very cool.
He's the talent. Jonathan's crushing it. Thrilled to be working with him. I've been a big fan of his since Green Hornet. So it really he's bringing the goods. Can't say enough good things about working with him.
That's great, man. No, that's terrific, and I'm glad. That's hilarious. Oh, he's saying he can come on in 15 minutes.
God, you want me to fan for 15 minutes? I can do it.
Well, I appreciate that. But Nick, what I want you to do is, no, I don't want you to jump on with David. I want us to have a one-on-one and talk about it. I mean, that'd be great, but it's only going to detract from other things that I'll talk to with David and stuff. I want you on a regular word balloon. So I'm glad you're watching and you can see my explanation of why I'm bothering you. But no, that's great. Truly, again, I'm very excited. I want to explore more Dynamite books. That's another reason why I have Nick on. So, all right. And he says, all right, he goes, he says, if it's him, me, you, and him, then he'll look like the smart one. Absolutely. But all right, good. Next time. Very good. All right. We'll figure out a date. Don't worry, Nick. I'm going to keep bugging you. Don't kid yourself. So, and I know he's a night owl. So if he wants to do it, and I know he's East Coast and a night owl. So if he wants to do it at, midnight East Coast time, I'm fine with that. I'm used to it with Bendis and all you West Coast guys doing things later than earlier and stuff. So, David, in your earlier role before you were writing comics, you wrote about comics and Newsarama and the like and stuff. Any thoughts on where the market is today and where readers are today?
I think it's one of those things that it's tougher than ever. I think comics journalism, it's really an industry that's often kind of built on passion, and it's not an industry that necessarily always has a lot of money or security. It's a lot of people doing things for little money, or a lot of people doing things for no money. They're just doing it for love of the game. And so for anybody who's a comics journalist, I'm always grateful for them doing that. I always want to take the time. For me, it's always about, will they take the time to say let me rephrase that. It's so hard to get traction in a crowded marketplace on your own work that anybody who's willing to kind of give us their time and give us their spotlight and give us their passion, I'm always grateful to that. But it is harder. I think it's absolutely shrinking. I have a lot of opinions about reviews because I spent 10 years writing them. And, there are fewer and fewer outlets doing reviews because, unfortunately, they don't really get a lot of clicks. They take a lot of time to write. They take a lot of brain power to write versus breaking news or, which that invariably gets more clicks. Yeah. It's one of those things that I do think that it's kind of gotten atomized a bit. I mean, you see how many voices there are on Twitter, and that's sort of become almost like the new thing rather than joining an outlet, or having your own channel. There's a lot of people who social media is kind of their speaker, their speaker. And, it's one of those things that I think in certain times you get some really insightful comments. I was reading a thread recently about Krakoa, about the X-Men line wrapping up that I thought was really insightful and really cool. Seeing the different how different writers have different takes on something like the Dominion. How Jonathan Hickman approaches it versus how Kieran Gillen approaches it, and I thought that was really interesting and cool. The thing that I think is a bummer is that because everything's so atomized, you don't have that element of people passing things down. You don't have that element of people training anymore. It's sort of, you kind of get thrown into the deep end, and it's very difficult to get any sort of internal feedback. And for me, that was something that was so important as somebody who worked at a newspaper. Is that I worked in a newsroom, and so being able to kind of pass that along to my reviewers was very important to me. And being able to kind of give some feedback and say, well, hey, like, that's an interesting perspective, and that's really cool. Or hey, like, have you thought about it in this other way? Because I'd rather you hear it from me than hear about it from a stranger on the internet. And so I do think that's been lost a little bit. But at the same time, I think when I came of age in all of this, things were very different from when Wizard was a thing, and when everybody that was very different. Paul Levitz and his fan magazines were coming up, so I think comics journalism is always a very different thing. I will say the other thing that, and it sometimes feels like the pot calling the kettle black being from on my side of the table now, is I do think that there's sometimes a degree of. Sometimes it comes across maybe as a little hostility, where people are saying, well, hey, I have this question and I need to know the answer. And these aren't state secrets. We're not curing cancer here. These are funny books. And it's one of those things that, like, for example, I can talk about it now so far in the rear view, but like Savage Avengers, I knew that Conan was leaving well before anybody else knew that Conan was leaving, because I was writing the book. I wrote Conan out of the book. I knew by the time that I had written issue 2, hey, these were the plans, and I had already written that escape hatch. But when that news gets leaked, then it's not my place to be making big sweeping statements about my employer. It's one of those things that, like, if people are knocking at my door to try to make a comment about my publisher, I can't talk about it. I don't want to be rude. It's just, it's not my place. And at the same time, it's very easy for things to get misconstrued. And you really spend your time on the internet trying to shout down rumors. We had something I think fairly recently where people were like, "Oh, Punisher. How long was Punisher supposed to be?" And I always wrote it as 4 issues. That was how I was asked to pitch it. That's how I developed it. But I can't spend all day on Twitter saying that. And so I think it's at the end of the day, it's pretty small potatoes. I think the thing that I like to focus on is that how many passionate people out there are really kind of carrying the industry on their backs. Their love of comics is infectious, and I see so many people at so many outlets who you can tell they live and breathe this stuff. You see it at places like Newsarama, you see it at CBR, you see it at Comic Book, you see it at The Beat, you see it at Popverse, you see it at Cool, you see it at channels like yours, John. And the fact that these outlets have their own followings. And I hear from people. I mean, there was a reason why I prioritized. I wanted to make sure we chatted about Space Ghost. Is I've had people come up to me at cons and say, "Hey, I heard about Savage Avengers because of Word Balloon," and I remember that. And so it really is a really interesting ecosystem that sometimes feels like it's kind of thrown together with Scotch tape and bubble gum, and but at the same time, like, I love this carny business that we're in. I think everybody comes to this from a place of love. I have that, and because this job is challenging. I always say it's the hardest job I've ever had, but it's the most rewarding job I've ever had. And I think that speaks to every time I sit down and write a page, I flash back to being a 5-year-old reading Amazing Spider-Man 346. and seeing Spider-Man fighting Venom, all across New York City, and it rewrote my synapses and put me on this path. And so at the end of the day, like that's the thing I always try to remember, and that's the thing that kind of keeps me going is just seeing other people being excited and enthusiastic about the work, and seeing my colleagues who they're in the same boat. That every comic that comes out is a minor miracle. The fact that it exists is a minor miracle. The fact that every comic, no matter if it's not for you, it's going to be for somebody, and that is it's such a cool thing about this business. Yeah, man, it sure beats digging ditches. What can I say?
Yeah, and I would agree with you that despite some of the problems that specific publishers might have economically or whatever, the great thing of observing what's been going on in comics in more than the last 20 years and 19 years doing this podcast is the fact that the bookshelf just keeps getting wider and the genres are becoming more accepted in comic book form. And like you said, no, there literally are comics for every interest. And we're not quite where Japan is with manga, but we're getting there. We're getting pretty close.
Sure. I'd go for their public transit first. But yes, I think, this is a niche industry, but it's one that you can see there's all these different packets and all of passion and all these different constituencies. And that's something that I try to go by. And I think that's the reason why I keep jumping from all these different genres is that I haven't found everybody yet, but I want to bring that diaspora together. I'm not here to preach to the choir. I want converts. And so that's why every book I write, I try to make it accessible to civilians. And I try to make it that you could give this to somebody as their first comic and they don't need to read anything. They can just enjoy it for what it is. And hasn't steered me wrong yet.
There's one question that I will ask if you think, because I think it might be spoilery. If you want people who maybe haven't read your Moon Knight miniseries, maybe we wouldn't want to ask it until they do. So you want to? Okay, fine.
Ask it. It's been out.
All right. Pumpkin Time says, "I love a good sibling story. What made you think of having Moon Knight face his deceased brother?"
Sure. Well, for me, when I first approached this story, I wanted to figure out a way that kind of leaned into Moon Knight's history as a mercenary, sort of leaned into that killer instinct a bit. And I also wanted something that kind of felt like Inception. That had been like a white whale that I'd been chasing to try to do a story that kind of spoke to that kind of mind-bending story. And so City of the Dead was kind of the way that like I wound up kind of coming to that. Whereas I was like, the Duat is a place that has already been established in the Marvel universe as a place that can be shaped by your memories and the contents of your heart. And I thought, Moon Knight's also got like a cool bunch of villains that have died. My favorite Moon Knight villains were all dead. Jeff Wilde is Midnight. Like I read the round robin storyline in Amazing Spider-Man as a kid. So I was like, Jeff Wilde, that guy rules. I love that cyborg. Love his little cravat suit a little less, but that's neither here nor there. So I was thinking, he's got like a cool bunch of villains that come together. And then I remember reading the Shadowland Moon Knight miniseries. That was kind of early on in my tenure at Newsarama. And so I remember thinking like, oh, dude, that guy killed his own brother. That's like hardcore. And I thought, that like I would, if you're going to the City of the Dead and you've killed your own brother, that's somebody who's going to be like watching your every move.
Yeah.
Kind of like the Marion Cotillard character from Inception. And so, I thought it was a really fun misdirect. I can't believe nobody guessed it until it came out. I'm so glad that nobody did. Having Randall Spector return as the Jackal Knight, powered by Anubis. That was such a fun character, and Marcelo did such a cool job with the design on that. That was a real highlight of the book. But also, I think it for me, I think it spoke to the through line of that book, which is about forgiveness. And so I think for me, I always kind of had that idea in mind that like Mark, his brother was a bad person. His brother was like literally like a sociopathic killer. But like at the same time, like Mark still remembers when they were kids. Mark remembers before all that stuff happened, and there's no way that you kill your own brother, no matter how bad he's gotten, and not feel some degree of guilt over it, not some degree of I failed this guy. And so being able to say like, that's the reason why Mark is so desperate to rescue this kind of kid brother figure from the city of the dead, is because he couldn't rescue his own brother. And he's got to, he's got to forgive himself for that. And he's got to forgive everything that's kind of brought him to this point. So yeah, that was kind of the reason that I wound up putting Randall in that book. And I still, I really enjoy that through line. I think it says something really cool about the character. And I thought, I didn't know that Moon Knight was going to die until well after I had kind of gotten the thing approved. But I think it was a cool storyline to wrap up Mark's adventures before Jed sent him off to the great beyond.
Absolutely. No, great stuff, man. Very cool, dude. Well, congrats. I'm excited for Space Ghost coming next month. And hold on one second. I'll bring back the cover there to remind everybody that they should go to their local shops as soon as possible and make sure you order this great book from Dynamite, Space Ghost #1. And, again, a little victory lap for the Punisher. And we'll see what the future holds for Joe. But that's cool stuff, man.
Well,
excellent.
Thank you so much for having me, John. It always means a lot to catch up. And thank you for everyone listening. I really appreciate it. Call your local comic shop. Initial orders for Space Ghost wrap up next week. So call your local comic shop, pre-order Space Ghost #1. Add us to your pull list. It would really mean a lot because, we've got some really fun stuff planned, and you're not going to want to miss it.
Fantastic, man. Tomorrow night on Word Balloon, I'm going to have Franco come on. And you saw, if you started from the beginning of this video or the audio, you know that he's got that card-playing game, LXT, and he's going to be on to talk about that. LXT is not just, a card-playing game like Upper Decker, Pokemon, or one of your classic card games, Wizards of the Coast, all that crap. I don't play them. But what I am excited about for this as well, Franco's introducing this whole new group of characters, and he has short stories that are illustrated, and is going to have a collection of those as part of his Kickstarter campaign, and also a who's who list and origins for all these characters. So if you're into finding out about a new universe of supernatural characters, we'll be discussing it with Franco tomorrow night here on Word Balloon Live. Thanks a lot for watching. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy.